Tonight, we begin with a dramatic ultimatum that has raised alarms in U.S. diplomatic circles, warned of by NATO strategists, and quietly prepared for by intelligence agencies. This is not a result of months of secret talks, but rather a single, striking publication that obliterated the final remnants of diplomatic restraint. In this publication, Russia openly referred to its nuclear doctrine, demanding Ukraine's complete surrender or facing what Moscow describes as irreversible consequences. This ultimatum, delivered with chilling directness, breached a threshold that Western leaders had hoped would remain unchallenged. When that threshold was crossed, the United States did not hesitate. It responded swiftly and decisively. While no official statements or diplomatic correspondences have been made public, there were unmistakable signs that the Kremlin was preparing for something unprecedented. For months, Putin had been hostile but calculated in his actions. His maneuvers had followed a certain rhythm and predictability, but the past days have seen this rhythm disappear. Suddenly, the movement of mobile launch platforms, encrypted communications between strategic command centers, the activation of early warning radar systems, and the unexpected withdrawal of diplomatic personnel. All these signs vanished without explanation. Whenever Putin disappears from the public eye, it signals that something significant is about to happen. Earlier today, U.S. intelligence detected what they described as unprecedented nuclear signaling activities. This included the relocation of platforms capable of carrying tactical warheads, which have been stationary for over 18 months. These are assets that Russia only activates for something exceptionally significant, signaling a shift in their strategic posture. Intelligence agencies struggle to categorize the nature of this operation. Was it an escalation of tensions, a coercive move, or simply preparation for something larger? What they did understand with certainty was that Moscow had shifted its strategic stance. When a nuclear-armed state shifts its position, even in a minor way, it demands the attention of military leaders, especially the Pentagon. The United States was already on high alert. Hours after Putin's broadcast, which demanded Ukraine's withdrawal from the territories Russia claims is annexed and called for NATO to halt all arms shipments, a chilling warning followed. Any breach would be met with all of Russia's means, including nuclear alternatives. Washington's response came immediately, and the message was clear. It was a rejection of the notion that any Western alliance could be intimidated into submission. Officials in Washington quickly labeled Putin's actions as irresponsible, destabilizing, and, most importantly, a grave miscalculation of Western resolve. But ultimatums only succeed when the recipient hesitates. Ukraine did not hesitate, nor did the United States. 6 hours after Putin's message, the Pentagon announced an emergency allocation of $2.3 billion in military aid. But this was not just a typical supply of ammunition or armored vehicles. These were advanced long-range attack platforms and weapons intended for a fundamentally different kind of military engagement. These included long-range ATACMS missiles, additional Patriot air defense batteries, and crucial components for F-16 fighter jets. These platforms and systems had previously been restricted due to concerns over escalation, but Washington acted swiftly, determined not to let Moscow gain the psychological upper hand. The United States didn't hesitate. It authorized strikes that would penetrate deeper into Russian-held territory, targeting the logistical hubs supplying Russian forces. The message was clear. Washington was targeting Russia's ability to follow through with its threats. The infrastructure that would have given Putin's ultimatum its teeth was undermined. Washington's response wasn't reckless. It was calculated, precise, and deliberate. It was a reaffirmation that the West would not be cowed by nuclear threats. But the stakes are much higher than mere military strategy. Intelligence sources suggest that Putin's ultimatum was a test. He sought to measure the solidity of Western support, which had been questioned for months. Putin wanted to see whether the United States would fracture under pressure, whether the political divisions in Washington would prevent a unified response. But instead of cracking, Washington responded with remarkable unity, and the Kremlin took notice. This wasn't just a military conflict. This was a test of resolve, a test of whether democracies could withstand the pressure of a nuclear-armed autocrat. And tonight, the response from the United States was a clear answer. The West would not break. The significance of the United States response cannot be overstated. It wasn't just about the immediate military aid. It was about the message it sent. In a matter of hours, Washington had not only reinforced Ukraine's military capabilities, but also demonstrated to the world that nuclear threats would not go unchecked. The response was methodical, reflecting a deep understanding of the situation. It wasn't a knee-jerk reaction, but rather the result of extensive preparation for just this type of crisis. The United States had anticipated a nuclear escalation from Russia, and when the moment arrived, it was ready. The Pentagon's decision to accelerate the deployment of long-range weapons was particularly notable. This was not simply a show of force. It was a strategic recalibration. The U.S. military had positioned itself to strike at Russia's most critical vulnerabilities: the logistical centers, the command infrastructure, and the systems that would enable Russia to carry out its nuclear posturing. By targeting these areas, Washington removed the very mechanisms that would have allowed Putin's threats to gain traction. What's equally significant is the lack of a nuclear escalation from the United States. Washington chose not to engage in nuclear rhetoric, which is often the instinctive response to nuclear threats. Instead, it focused on conventional warfare capabilities, emphasizing that nuclear threats would not be answered with nuclear escalation. By sticking to conventional means, the U.S. ensured that the playing field remained focused on military might, not nuclear fear-mongering. This decision underscores the key strategic element of Washington's response. It was designed to preserve stability. If the United States had escalated to match Russia's nuclear posturing, it would have risked igniting a full-scale nuclear conflict. But by staying within conventional warfare, the U.S. signaled its strength without resorting to the extreme escalation that Moscow was trying to provoke. The move also reinforced the unity of NATO and its resolve to support Ukraine. In the hours following the Pentagon's announcement, NATO partners worked in lockstep with the United States. While Western powers had long been working together, what we saw here was a remarkable show of unity in the face of an unprecedented threat. European allies focused on strengthening Ukraine's air defense, which has suffered weaknesses in recent weeks. They increased their surveillance of Russian nuclear forces by 300%. These coordinated actions demonstrated that NATO was not merely reacting to Russia's provocation, but was, in fact, anticipating the threat and acting accordingly. The rapid, decisive nature of the West's response has sent shockwaves through the Kremlin. Putin had expected the opposite. He likely anticipated divisions, hesitation, and perhaps even a fracture in Western resolve. What he got instead was a united, rapid, and targeted response that directly challenged the core of his ultimatum. This moment revealed the true strength of the Western alliance. It was not just about military hardware or defensive measures. It was about the resilience of a united front in the face of nuclear blackmail. But while Putin's gambit has been defied, the stakes remain incredibly high. What we are witnessing now is not merely a military standoff. It's a test of what Putin can endure without losing his grip on power. Analysts suggest that Putin's ultimatum was designed not just to intimidate Ukraine or the West, but to test the political cohesion of NATO. Would the United States and its allies back down in the face of pressure, as Putin has done so many times with other adversaries? The answer, so far, has been a resounding no. But the ultimate outcome remains uncertain. The consequences of this standoff are profound. Russia's continued pressure on Ukraine is not just a test of military might, but a test of political will. Putin wants to determine whether the West will buckle under the strain of nuclear threats. He seeks to undermine the unity that has characterized NATO's support for Ukraine. But with every passing day, the West is demonstrating that it will not allow such threats to succeed. Ukraine remains resolute in its defense, and NATO continues to bolster its support. As this conflict progresses, the question remains, will Putin back down or escalate further? His next move will be critical. But what is clear is that the West has shown it is ready for either outcome. The rapid and resolute response to Putin's ultimatum has shifted the trajectory of this conflict. No longer can Russia expect to win through intimidation alone. The West has demonstrated that it is prepared for the long haul, ready to absorb pressure and continue supporting Ukraine's sovereignty. What we are witnessing today is not simply a military clash. It is a fundamental test of international resolve. Putin's ultimatum was a direct challenge to the very foundation of Western unity. It was a calculated move designed to fracture the alliance that is held together in support of Ukraine. But as the hours passed, it became increasingly clear that Putin had miscalculated. Instead of dividing the West, his actions have only served to galvanize it. NATO, for all its complexities and internal debates, has emerged from this crisis more united than ever before. This unity was evident not only in the military response, but in the diplomatic actions that followed. The rapid deployment of advanced weapon systems and the coordination between NATO partners showcased a level of preparedness and unity that Putin likely did not anticipate. What's most striking is how quickly NATO and the United States aligned their actions, providing a level of operational coherence that sent a clear message to the Kremlin. Nuclear threats will not divide the West. But this response was more than just a defense of Ukraine. It was a defense of international norms. By rejecting Putin's nuclear blackmail and focusing on conventional military support, the United States and its allies sent a powerful signal about the future of global security. The West has made it clear that the use of nuclear weapons as a diplomatic tool will not be tolerated. In doing so, they have reaffirmed their commitment to preventing the normalization of nuclear threats as a bargaining chip in global diplomacy. As this moment unfolds, it is clear that the West has recognized the true nature of Putin's strategy. This is not just about territorial disputes or military engagements. This is about power, influence, and the ability to dictate the future of international security. Putin's threats were an attempt to rewrite the rules of global diplomacy, but the West's response has made it clear that those rules will not be so easily changed. The next phase of this conflict will likely see Russia recalibrating its approach. The initial shock of Putin's ultimatum has passed, and now the West must remain vigilant. Intelligence agencies will be watching Moscow's next moves closely, analyzing every shift in strategy. The West has shown it is prepared for escalation, but it also remains committed to a measured response, one that prevents further escalation without sacrificing Ukraine's sovereignty. At the same time, Ukraine's response cannot be overlooked. Despite facing existential threats, Ukraine has not only resisted Putin's demands, but has also demonstrated remarkable strategic agility. Ukrainian forces have continued to press on, launching operations that have shown their ability to fight back against the Russian juggernaut. More than just a defense of territory, Ukraine's actions are a testament to the resilience of a nation determined to remain free. The United States has made its stance clear, but the next few days will be crucial. How will Russia respond? Will Putin continue to escalate tensions, or will he attempt to recalibrate in an effort to save face? There is still the possibility that Russia could double down on its nuclear rhetoric, using it as a tool of intimidation. But every escalation from Moscow only brings greater cost, both militarily and diplomatically. Putin's recent actions also highlight the internal pressures he is facing. Hardliners in Russia are demanding quicker military victories, while economic sanctions continue to erode Russia's economic base. The Russian military has suffered staggering losses, and the public at home is growing increasingly restless. Putin's threat today was not just about Ukraine. It was about satisfying these domestic pressures. He hoped to project strength, to show his people and the world that he would not be cowed by Western resolve. But the rapid and unified response from the West has shown him that his strategy is failing. Moreover, as the West continues to provide advanced military aid and support, Putin's options become more limited. Each day that passes without a major Russian breakthrough adds to the pressure Putin faces. His window for achieving quick and decisive results is narrowing, and the longer this conflict drags on, the harder it will be for him to claim victory. This crisis is far from over, but the way it is unfolding offers critical lessons. The West has demonstrated that it will not be intimidated by nuclear threats. NATO's unity has been strengthened, and Ukraine has proven that it will not surrender under pressure. The cost of further Russian escalation is rising, and Putin is now confronted with a stark choice: continue on his current path and risk further isolation and military losses, or attempt to find a way out that preserves some semblance of victory. As we look ahead, the critical question is whether Putin will recalibrate his strategy or whether he will continue down a dangerous path of escalation. The next few days will be decisive in determining the future trajectory of this conflict. In the coming days, the strategic decisions made by Russia, the United States, and NATO will shape the future of this conflict. What's clear is that the balance of power is shifting. Putin's ultimatum was designed to push the West into a corner, to test its resolve and unity. But the response from the United States and its allies has shown that they are not easily swayed. In fact, they have demonstrated an unprecedented level of preparedness and unity, sending a message that will resonate far beyond this moment. One of the most striking aspects of this crisis is how rapidly the West has adapted. While Putin anticipated a slow, measured response, he instead found himself facing a coordinated, swift reaction that undermined the very foundation of his strategy. NATO's decision to increase surveillance of Russia's nuclear forces by 300% is a clear indication of the seriousness with which the alliance views the threat. This is not just about defending Ukraine. This is about ensuring that the principles of international security remain intact. For NATO, this crisis represents both a challenge and an opportunity. The alliance's unity has been tested in ways it hasn't been since the Cold War, but the response has been clear. NATO has rallied around Ukraine and reaffirmed its commitment to collective defense. While there are always internal debates within the alliance, the response to Putin's ultimatum has proven that NATO can still function as a unified force when it matters most. Meanwhile, the United States has shown that it is prepared to go to great lengths to support its allies and defend international norms. The $2.3 billion in emergency military aid is just the beginning. This was not simply a check in a ledger. It was a direct challenge to Russia's attempts to intimidate and divide. Washington has made it clear that it will not stand idly by as Russia uses nuclear threats to achieve its goals. But just as important is the message this sends to other countries considering similar tactics. The West will not allow nuclear blackmail to become a legitimate tool of diplomacy. As for Ukraine, it has continued to defy expectations. Not only has it refused to bow to Putin's demands, but it has also shown that it is capable of fighting back against the most formidable military force in Europe. Ukraine's ability to maintain momentum on the battlefield, despite overwhelming odds, has been a testament to its resilience, more than just a military success. This resistance is a moral victory for the country, and it has bolstered its international standing. But while Ukraine's resistance has been inspiring, it has also made it clear that this war is far from over. The situation remains fluid, and the outcome is still uncertain. Putin's next move will be crucial. The Kremlin's decision to conduct joint military exercises with its allies, like Iran and North Korea, signals that Russia is preparing for something bigger. But the United States and NATO have made it clear that they are prepared for that as well. What happens next will depend on how Russia responds to the growing pressure. Will Putin continue to escalate, or will he attempt to find a way to back down without losing face? Either way, the risks are high. Further escalation could lead to even more severe consequences, both for Russia and for the global order. The West has already made it clear that nuclear threats will not go unanswered, and Putin must understand that any further aggression could prompt a devastating response. As the clock ticks down, it is important to recognize the broader implications of this crisis. This is not just about Ukraine or Russia. It is about the future of global security and the rules that govern international relations. Putin's attempt to use nuclear threats as a bargaining chip challenges the very foundation of the post-Cold War order. The West has responded forcefully, but the true test will come in the coming days as the situation continues to unfold. What is at stake here is not just the territorial integrity of Ukraine, but the stability of the entire international system. The West has shown that it will not allow the use of nuclear weapons as a diplomatic tool. But the question remains, will Russia learn from this experience, or will it double down on its efforts to force the world to bend to its will? The next few days will reveal the answer, and they will determine whether this conflict moves closer to resolution or whether it enters a more dangerous phase. As we look ahead, the next 72 to 96 hours will be critical. Putin's ultimatum was not a bluff. It was a clear demonstration of his intent to escalate the conflict. But how the West responds in the coming days will define the trajectory of this war. The stakes are higher than ever. Putin has tied his credibility to this moment, both domestically and internationally, and he has placed himself in a precarious position. If Ukraine refuses to surrender and the West does not collapse under pressure, Putin will be faced with several choices, each carrying significant risks. One possibility is that Putin could escalate further, pushing the conflict into even more dangerous territory. Such an escalation would almost certainly provoke a stronger response from the West, potentially triggering a broader military confrontation. NATO has already made it clear that any use of nuclear weapons would fundamentally alter the nature of the conflict. While the alliance has not specified the exact consequences, The ambiguity itself serves as a deterrent. Putin knows that crossing this line could lead to consequences he cannot fully predict, and the risks of escalation would be immense. Alternatively, Putin might decide to soften his rhetoric while continuing his current military operations. This would be an attempt to save face domestically, especially with hardliners demanding visible victories. However, backing down after issuing such a bold ultimatum would signal weakness and could further erode his support among nationalist factions within Russia. The pressure from domestic forces could become unbearable, and Putin would have to navigate this delicate balancing act. A third possibility is that Putin could look for a way out, a face-saving mechanism that allows him to retreat without appearing defeated. However, this option would require a willing partner, and Ukraine has made it clear that it will not negotiate under the threat of nuclear coercion. This puts Putin in a difficult position, where his options for retreat are limited and the cost of further escalation continues to rise. What is becoming increasingly clear is that the tools Russia has relied on throughout this conflict, military pressure, energy coercion, and nuclear threats, are losing their effectiveness. Each escalation prompts a stronger, more unified response from the West, and each threat that goes unanswered erodes the credibility of future threats. Ukraine's continued resistance and the growing support from NATO have proven that these tactics will not achieve Russia's goals. This is not just a military conflict. It is a test of whether coercion can succeed against a united democratic alliance. And tonight, that test has yielded a clear result. The West has demonstrated that it will not be intimidated by nuclear threats. NATO has held firm, and Ukraine has shown that it will continue to fight for its sovereignty. The United States and its allies have made it clear that nuclear blackmail will not dictate policy, and Putin's ultimatum has already failed. However, the situation remains extremely fragile. Putin is under intense domestic pressure to deliver results, and leaders in this position do not always make rational decisions. They often cling to failed strategies, hoping that they will somehow yield a breakthrough. The next few days will be crucial in determining whether Putin can adjust his strategy or whether he will continue to escalate in an effort to achieve his objectives. For now, the West must remain steadfast. The unity of NATO, the resilience of Ukraine, and the preparedness of the United States must continue to hold firm. The global community is watching closely, and what happens in the coming days will have far-reaching implications for international security. The decisions made now will shape the future of this conflict and the broader geopolitical landscape. One thing is clear: Ukraine is still fighting. America remains committed to its allies, and Putin's ultimatum has already failed. But the war is far from over, and the next stage will determine whether peace is achievable or whether the conflict will escalate further. As we continue to monitor the situation, one thing remains certain: the international order has been tested, and the resolve of the West has proven stronger than anyone, including Putin, may have anticipated.